Top 5 Existential Crises Facing Humanity. These have been in the back of my mind for quite a while now, so I decided to finally put in some effort to understand what exactly we are facing. Number 5. AI. Skynet, Ultron, HAL, and whatnot. The science fiction writers tried to warn us countless times, and yet we are building the thing. In 1950, Alan Turing proposed a test in his paper Computing Machinery and Intelligence. The idea was simple. A human would chat with another human and a computer and try to guess who's who or what. But even after 72 years, on 29th November 2022, there was no machine available for the general public which could convincingly impersonate a human. The next day, everything changed. ChatGPT passed the Turing test and became the fastest adopted site and now app in history thus far. This is a big deal. Since that moment, AI has entered the public consciousness and it has improved considerably in various fields and is expected to keep this pace of improvement in the near future. Which is why the discourse surrounding it is largely about what it can do in the future, in a way obscuring the importance of passing the Turing test. The full impact of which is yet to be clear. AI doesn't yet have a body, however, because the robotics revolution promised decades ago simply didn't happen. So the main threat from AI as of now doesn't seem to be an army of robots killing or imprisoning humanity, but rather something like mass manipulation, misinformation, disinformation, efficiency in creating weapons as opposed to autonomous drones running amok. It can very well happen, but even at the best speed, building a body or bodies for AI on a scale to kill 8 billion of us is at least a decade away. But the nuclear weapons are here, right now. The consent to use which can perhaps be generated through AI, which leads me to the number 4. Number 4, World War III. In the modern paradigm in which just about everyone lives today, including the so-called fundamentalist religious types, no one likes war. No one likes war even if they're on the side of the good and the just. People are pushed into wars, and there are just too many things pushing everyone into action. Russia, for example, had a demographic crisis, and Ukraine was about to join NATO. Add to that the American obsession with breaking Russia apart, since the USSR collapsed rather than cooperating with it, and Putin gets a strong push towards starting a war. If he hadn't, he would never have been able to start a war. These pressures are everywhere. China too has a demographic crisis. If it doesn't start a war, chances are it will break into pieces as living standards keep declining. Not to mention, at some point, it simply wouldn't have the soldiers to fight because of bad demographics. The US is losing its global hegemony, and empires tend not to let go of their power and are generally beaten down into a lower status. Every country around India is defunct. It might just strengthen its borders, so 3 out of the world's 4 strongest countries are under pressure of starting a war. Even a complete trade bloc between these will absolutely destroy the global civilization, lowering living standards for many and sparking civil wars all around the world. A kinetic war would be much worse, possibly ending with nuclear winter. Now this has a much better chance of destroying humanity than AI, but maybe we won't die with a bang, but rather with a whimper. Number 3. Population collapse. The UN projections for global population simply don't take the complexities of human conditions into account. The West, which has been developing individuality, women's participation in the workforce, and inheritance for a millennium, was far more resilient to the Industrial Revolution than other parts of the world. When the same things happened in Japan, the demographic transition was much faster. In China, it happened in a generation. Iran went from a TFR of 6.5 to 2 in the span of 12 years. Not to mention the damage that the internet has done to building relationships, let alone family. So even in the West, the fertility rate will likely drop much lower than the UN predictions, which don't take these things into account. Shanna Swan's research shows that sperm count has dropped at the rate of 1 to 1.4% per year for about 40 years. 1 to 1.4% per year. If that's true, this grandma is not a grandma, she is the messenger of doom. It effectively means the last human would be born before 2080. This puts Homo sapiens in the list of species which are in danger of extinction. Even if that was not the case, which I have no reason to think since no one has yet refuted her research, still, just the rate of demographic transition in non-Western countries would halve the global population at the end of the century, through birth rates alone. As you can imagine, this will be catastrophic for the global civilization, which is based in large part on the assumption that the human population will keep growing, which it will not. So the secondary impacts would be massive. Not extinction level maybe, still I'd rank it higher simply because it's a sure thing to happen, as sure as number 2. Number 2, Holocene extinction. After global cooling and global warming, I wasn't too thrilled about climate change, a nebulous term towards which I had only apathy and suspicion. The Anthropocene has largely flown under my radar, and I unironically believe it is the fault of the global scientific community that it did so. It always seemed fake, distant, and narrow. Only after encountering the work of Daniel Schmatterberger and Johann Rockström did the planetary boundary system and Holocene extinction started to matter. It became real. It's not about one narrow metric like temperature, and they point out how renewables have so far been non-solutions. The use of fossil fuels has been increasing ever since we started measuring it, and adding the use of renewables to the mix has not made any difference to the trend at all. People don't use either fossil fuels or renewables. They take both and want more. On top of that, renewables are harmful to the environment. Making electric batteries requires environmental destruction. Wind turbines trap wind, obviously. Solar panels take a lot of land whilst being unreliable energy providers, not to mention they become obsolete in 30 years. For those who don't know, Holocene is the era which had the optimal conditions for most living things alive on the planet Earth today, including humans. The Anthropocene is the era in which the definitive force transforming Earth was humanity. I'd argue it started about 10,000 years ago. Most would put it somewhere in the last 200 years. Holocene extinction is when the conditions which enabled humanity and most species on the planet to thrive are irreversibly damaged. Planetary boundaries are the limitations, crossing which would cause Holocene extinction. There are 9 of these, identified after years of research and debates. Number 1. Climate change. Greenhouse gas emissions leading to global warming. Number 2. Biosphere integrity. Extinction rates and the reduction of ecosystem services. Number 3. Land system change. Deforestation and changes in the land use that affect habitat and biodiversity. Number 4. Biogeochemical flows. Excessive nitrogen and phosphorus cycles due to agricultural activities, leading to pollution. Number 5. Ocean acidification. Increased CO2 absorption by oceans, affecting marine life. Number 6. Freshwater use. Overexploitation of freshwater resources, leading to scarcity. Number 7. Atmospheric aerosol loading. Tiny particles in the atmosphere from pollution that affect health and climate. Number 8. Stratospheric ozone depletion. Loss of ozone, which protects Earth from harmful UV radiation. Number 9. Novel entities. Introduction of new chemical pollutants like plastics and synthetic compounds that do not have natural cycles. Yep, that's an existential crisis list within an existential crisis list. We have crossed 6 out of 9 of these things and will complete the planetary boundaries bingo in next 10 to 15 years. In many ways, we have to do so for survival alone, given the number of people alive today on the planet. Wait, so overpopulation is the problem or population collapse? That's the thing, you see. Number 1. Meta crisis. Have you watched Power Rangers as a kid? when 5 of them team up and make a bigger robot that's more powerful than the sum of them. Or Avengers, when the team as a whole defeats an enemy they can't defeat one by one. I'm talking about emergence, the idea that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. That's the meta-crisis. Everything I mentioned here and more hitting the global civilization in the period of 30 to 40 years, and for all intents and purposes, destroying it. It's a crisis as a result of a combination of all other crises, which, among other things, damages mental health, which becomes a crisis of its own. No one can plan and survive this. No one. No elite is safe from this, no matter whatever they have convinced themselves of. Most people aren't even looking at these things and their full implications. They don't have the skill of systems thinking, which is why the scientific community failed to convey or even to understand the Holocene extinction in its entirety. Something had to be done differently, hence we are seeing people like Daniel and John come out seemingly out of nowhere. There are just so many of us humans and we are just absolutely everywhere and we can and will adapt to things. We just can't as of now imagine what we can adapt to. Some community somewhere will survive the meta-crisis. Without a course correction, however, the global civilization is sure to collapse in the 21st century. The people who are developing AI are not doing so to save the bright blue sky, the humming bees, the clean rivers, or the wonderful animals. They are doing so for virtual salvation. Everyone is a philosopher, and it's not hard to see what the philosophy of Elon Musk and Sam Altman is. It's not too different from people like Ray Kurzweil. The destruction of living beings and living systems is justified under the assumption that it can, along with consciousness and all, be recreated on a digital substrate, somehow, without any empirical evidence whatsoever. The same materialist worldview is at the core of the meta-crisis. One would not mechanize life if one sees value in life. One would not fight to destroy life if one sees value in life. One would bring life into the world if one sees value in life. One would not thoughtlessly destroy living systems if one sees value in life. And one would not, in effect, commit suicide if one sees value in life. Value which the neo-Darwinist materialist worldview absolutely denies. The meta-crisis is, in essence, the meaning crisis. I'd say, unironically, the best way to survive the meta-crisis is to be lucky.